This video is going to cover the mangrove exam questions that we got in class, and it's gonna actually incorporate all of the content that you took in the notes and then a little bit more. And I'm gonna try not to say I actually just restarted it because I had said it like 3 times in the first sentence, so keep me accountable. I just did it. There we go. I'm gonna start with this picture because it's just a good review. So they're really good for biodiversity. This is an important habitat for fish and for mollusks. It's also an important nursery. So not just a habitat, provides food, provides shelter for smaller species from larger species, and is again an important nursery for juvenile fish before they grow and can go to the ocean. Again, another habitat for mammals. I just said it again. It's a resource for humans, obviously, and for marine organisms as well. It provides food. I literally just saw the word wood and said food. Provides wood. They use it for, there's again, I'm so sorry, I need to cut that out. Provides wood for fuel sources. It's also used for paper products, for building homes, for infrastructure, which would be like roadways. I just did again, transportation, buildings, etc. We can extract medicines from them. So this would be something that we can mention in terms of biodiversity. Okay. Coastal protection. This is a big one. So it prevents erosion because of these prop roots here. They're able to trap sediment by slowing down the water, and then sediment will start to build up, and it can actually build up the land, which is perfect for it because it needs soft sediment for its roots to grow into. So they protect the coast from erosion. They reduce the sediment flow, did it again, from land to the sea. Not great. They also can filter out water because they'll filter out did it again, mineral ions, and curses, y'all, curses. Mineral ions and just excess nutrients. Okay, and this will also, again, reduce the impact of waves that are on the shoreline. So it's going to minimize coastal erosion. And that is actually going to obviously be a really big plus for us because it costs a lot of money when we have coastal erosion. What's not mentioned here, oh no, it is the climate one. There's economic benefits. Economic benefits, again, we're going to save money by not eroding our coasts. We can also use the species that are there for food sources. It provides ecotourism benefits. It's going to save us money through helping to mitigate climate change. Climate regulation. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they can store this carbon in their leaves, in their wood, in their roots as well. The roots can store a lot. And so this will also help decrease global warming. And of course, ocean acidification, which can cause erosion of organisms that have a calcium skeleton, a calcium exoskeleton. Ocean acidification creates calcium. Oh, I was going to say calcium carbonate. No, carbonic acid, CaCO3. No, that's calcium carbonate, my bad. H2CO3. I knew that didn't sound right. Okay, and then again, it does photosynthesis because it's a plant, so it's going to take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and synthesize glucose and release oxygen. Something that we're going to mention in the exam answer that wasn't in the text, so it wasn't going to be in something of the note page that I made you, is about their leaves. If we look at their leaves, and you can see here, this seedling turning to the propagule, and these seedlings were a flower. and it's a propagule. So it's literally growing from the seedling to the propagule off of the parent plant. It really couldn't survive if it dropped as a seed. It wouldn't be able to survive in the saline water, nor would it be able to take root just being the seed. So the propagule is adapted for that. It will help it float away from the parent plant so it's not to compete with it. But something to notice, you have some salt excretion here and salt buildup, and that's a good thing. That means it's not getting inside of the tissue itself, causing water loss through osmosis. And you can see all the sediment that's on there. Could have been windy, so there could have been some wind erosion, but these leaves they're thick. They have a very waxy cuticle. Cuticle is the outside covering of a leaf. They have there's them again, like leather-like structure, leather-like texture. And so that is just going to aid the plant in not losing water when it's in a salty environment. Those leaves are very tough. Okay. So his first question, mangrove forest developed in the littoral zone. The littoral zone is also called the intertidal zone. So you're going to have salty water, but it's estuarine. I'm going to spell it right. It means you have freshwater input from a river and salt water from the ocean. Of some tropical and subtropical coast, remember, they grow between 25 north to 25 south. They grow best 25 degrees north, 25 degrees south. They grow best there. So you need warm temperature year round. Explain, which is why and how. The red mangrove, Rhizophora mangle, notice it's in italics. This is its scientific name or its species name, genus, and then the species is adapted to its environment. So we need to talk about the adaptations of it living in the littoral zone or the intertidal zone in tropical and subtropical areas. I just might prefer this better. Okay. All right, so if we want to think about just top down with the plant, okay, so we have the leaves. This is just going to be a fabulous sketch. We'll have to talk about that. And then its fabulous roots, the prop roots. And what else they have on them are their sweet little babes, the little propagules. And something else we can mention are the lenticels that are on the top of the roots. And again, they close up whenever they get inundated with water from storm surge or really high spring tides, your high tides. Okay, and so a lot of it stays submerged. But there are some that are on the top of the water that stick out, and we've all seen that because we live by them. And that's just going to aid them in absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere. So we'll want to think about this top down so we can get to writing about it. Okay, starting at the top then, we can talk about their leaves. And this is something that, though it's expected to be answered on the exam question, I can tell you it is not put in the syllabus, nor was it put in the textbook. So another emphasis on why going through exam answers is really important. So they have tough, thick, it's referred to as leathery leaves. And we're looking for the explain command words. So that really is just a statement. We need to explain it. This will be to reduce evaporation. Just the explain. Moving down their roots. They have prop roots. And we got to consider what their substrate is like. They're not in a rocky substrate. Sometimes they're in a muddy area, or they're in an area with really fine sediments, which is easily erodible. And if it was just one wooden structure holding up the tree, and then you had a lot of erosion, a lot of water erosion, that could definitely cause it to erode away and get dislodged from the sediment. But this plant has multiple anchors, so even if one kind of loses the sediment around it, it's not going to be a detriment to the plant. And so this is the statement, prop roots, and then explain. To provide stability or anchorage for unstable substrates. Something else we referred to as an unstable substrate was the sandy shore. But we're not done with the roots yet. There's also more adaptations there. By using the venticles on the roots. Again, these are on the outside of it that are above the water line. Oxygen from the atmosphere is absorbed. Okay, and then why does that have to happen? Like, what's the adaptation for that? If they're absorbing it from the atmosphere, that means that there must not be some in the habitat the roots are actually in. This is due to low oxygen concentration in the substrate. Or you can refer to this as the anoxic substrate. Oxic refers to the amount of oxygen, and meaning something negative or not. So anoxic, not oxygen. Almost through. We're not done with the roots yet. But the roots have salt exclusion. I think the video I said salt seclusion. They seclude themselves from the salt. They exclude the salt. Roots can exclude salt. Why is this important? From the high salinity content in the water. If anyone's looking for this question, it is from the Specimen Paper 1. Specimen Paper 1 for the 2022 syllabus. If they're not in my class. Almost done. And then if they're adapted to that environment, it's not just that plant. It's going to be that plant and its future plants. So we need to talk about the sweet little offsprings, little propagules. All right, mangroves. Perform. I don't think perform. I need to set them again. I'm so sorry. I don't think perform is like the good word for it. Mangroves have, maybe. Viva, which means life. Viviparous. Sorry, not viva. VV. that sounds better if you put methods at the end. In parentheses, it's not exactly a part of the exam answer. But mentioning that they have viviparous reproduction methods, or they do viviparous reproduction, which essentially is, and sorry for saying that these propagules, many plants will drop their seeds. Sometimes they'll drop it in the form of a fruit, and then the seeds are on the inside, so animals will eat it, walk away from the parent plant, excrete it somewhere else, and now that seed is going to be growing further away from the parent plant. But if they just drop these seeds, like I said, these seeds wouldn't survive in the salt water, so they spend some time getting nourishment, getting nutrients, getting fresh water that's been filtered through the parent plant. Again, that's something that mangroves can do. They can filter through the water. They can filter out the excess sediments and salt from the water. So this propagule right here is able to gain the nutrients that it would typically get on its own if it was in like a freshwater setting or a terrestrial setting, land setting. But because it's in a salt environment, it has to spend a lot of time developing itself to be able to be freed away whenever it's a little bit bigger, and it can float through the ocean and not die due to water loss. So, viviparous reproduction methods: by using propagules. Another mark with that viviparous reproduction regarding the propagules, which float upright. Growth starts, and they can float for up to a year. On average, about 40 days. They'll float in the ocean. They'll float away on the surface currents, away from the parent plant. Growth starts when propagule settles in a sediment-rich substrate or suitable substrate. I just don't love the use of suitable, because then you're not really describing what's suitable. I'm trying the word. Substrate with fine sediments, because it can't be a rocky substrate. Okay, and I'm actually gonna crop this answer and move it so it's not in the way. Okay, so that one top to bottom is all the answers. She's just 5 marks. Move this out of the way. Okay, now discuss the importance of mangrove forests to human communities. And so you can reference what you have on your note page. I think the only thing that was not on your note page from this question was this first one about their leaves. But now you have it. Discuss the importance of mangrove forests to human communities. It's how they support humans. This would be a lot of that economic benefit that we mentioned and what I just mentioned in the beginning of this. Okay, we can first talk about that we get food sources from there. The food sources are going to be fish, shellfish, and shellfish species. And so what do the mangrove forests do that is going to aid our food sources? It's going to help us be able to get those food sources. So we could start with that one. Mangroves are a habitat for human, and this is also in parentheses in the mark scheme, but just so you have a little more specifics. Food sources or food species. All right, they are a nursery ground, and that's for the juvenile species. Mangroves are also a breeding ground for our food species. Within the statement of it being a nursery ground, if it's a nursery, it's going to be for younger species. So we refer to them as juveniles. Juvenile species. Use prop roots of the mangrove for shelter. And so with that, as a juvenile species, they're going to be able to survive because they are sheltered within the prop roots. Prop roots will also give them oxygen for respiration. They're also going to be able to supply, just being by the plant in general, organic material as it's a producer. So it's a really great trophic level 1 organism. Anyway, and that is going to aid in our food species, our future food source growing and just thriving. Okay, another one. Mangroves provide or allow for ecotourism or even just tourism industry. Anytime anybody's coming to Florida or in our area and they go on a dolphin tour or they go on a kayaking or stand-up paddleboard, things like that within the river, that is supporting ecotourism because they are inadvertently also learning about the ecosystem, gaining a deeper appreciation for it. It's hiring local community members and then adding money back into our community. All right, don't need this. Another really big one for us, it offers coastal protection. From waves and storms. You're mentioning that they help reduce erosion. They're timber or lumber sources. They are fuel sources. And again, in a reference to the biodiversity that you guys went through last week, they provide medicinal products or provisions. And one that is detrimental globally that they help human communities with. Mangroves decrease CO2 through photosynthesis. And within that same climate change or mentioning of carbon dioxide, they're going to decrease global warming, or you could say decreasing, not going down or lowering, but decreasing would be a better one if you're talking about a rate. Decreasing ocean acidification, because if they're taking in the CO2, then it's not getting dissolved in the ocean. That also will affect our food sources if shellfish are one of them. Ocean acidification by acting as a carbon sink. Or carbon storage. There's the difference between a carbon sink and a carbon source. A source is going to be where something is coming from, like its source. So the sink is going to be, if you turn on the sink, water goes down into the sink. A sink is where something is going to get stored and it gets like sunk into. Okay, so that one's just about humans. Some math. Oh, hello, ruler. How do I get rid of the ruler? Just move it out of the way. Get out of here. Okay. All right, table 3.1. And this question actually goes with this one, but the way that it was printed, I wanted you to see the figure that they gave you and then the questions that associated with it. I want you to see it together. So I did switch up the numbers a bit. Sorry, I didn't mention for people who are not my student right now, but maybe are watching this. This question number 2, describe the importance to human communities. That is from the October-November retake test. I believe it's paper 1. And it's the very last question. Or paper 11, rather. Actually, paper 11, 12, and 13 were all identical. It's the very last page. Question 6B. Now, the remaining of these are going to be from the one my students took last year, the paper 11, May, June 2022. Again, the other one was that number 2 on here was from October, November 2022. All the papers were the same. That was the paper 1s. The first question is from the specimen paper 1. Okay, so we're looking at changes in the mangrove forest areas. So we're probably going to be needing to look at an area unit, consider units for this, in different regions of Madagascar between 1975 and 2005. So here are your regions. And then the changes in the forest area. There's your unit, measured in kilometers squared, square kilometers. Okay, so the way we can read this is like from 1975 to 1990, that 15-year period. This is the change. So Bambakota Bay lost 66 square kilometers. And then in 1990 to 2000, just in that 10-year period, they lost 87 square kilometers. And then in a 5-year period, they lost 68 square kilometers. So the rate of loss is definitely increasing for sure. So that's how we read it. Use the table, calculate the total changes, so gain or loss, in mangrove forest area between 1975 and 2005. So we need to take into account all of these values. So starting at 1975, ending at 2005. The first one is Bambakota. I'm sure I'm saying it not correct. Total changes. So it's a number. So remember, it can increase or it could decrease, or I guess it could stay the same. Bambakota Bay. So between 75 and 90, it lost 66 square kilometers. This is not the answer. I'm just showing you the word for it. And then 1990, 2000, it lost another. So I guess I can add this, or so yeah. It lost another 87 because they want the total. So we're going to put them together. And then 2000 to 2005, they lost another 68. I would do this on a calculator. I mean, obviously, I think you know the kind of math I'm going to do, but the iPad doesn't have a calculator on it. Like, you have to download another app, which, what a flaw. What a flaw. But when you put these all together, do your put togethers, you're adding them. 66, 87, and 68, and they're all negative. They're all losses. You're going to get a loss. You could say a decrease of 221 kilometers squared, square kilometers. Please remember a unit. or this answer won't matter. And then Ambanja, Ambanja, just kidding. Ambanja, maybe? Okay, so right here, 1975, 1990, there was a gain of 75, so a positive 75. I want the total, so I'm going to add. And then in that 10-year period, 1990, 2000, they lost 12. And then in that 5-year period, 2000, 2005, they gained another 18. And they probably gaining another 18 just based off one of the last slide of notes, that last topic that you had about human threats to the ecosystem, to the mangrove forest, and that we were changing the land use for infrastructure, so roads, streets, which I guess is the same thing as roads. Thank you so much. Changing it to have shrimp farms, changing it to put like golf courses. Gosh, golf courses is the bane of the environment. It is the worst. People are now trying to use wastewater, not black water, but gray water for watering golf courses, but it is just such a massive waste of resources. Anyway, I'm assuming that plus 18 is from mangrove restoration. That's all I was trying to get at. The replanting them. So they had an increase of 75, then they lost 12, and then another increase of 18. It's going to be a gain. So if you add those all together, remember it's negative 12 though, a gain, or you could say an increase of 81 square kilometers. Again, don't forget the unit, otherwise it won't matter. I don't think they would give partial credit on this because it's only one market piece. Suggest 3 reasons for the change in mangrove forest area in Madagascar over the period 1975-2005. And this could be any of those regions. Any of them. So over here, we're going to have overall a loss. This is going to be a loss. Mahajamba Bay, overall, even though they did have an increase from 2000 to 2005, overall there's still going to be a loss. Ambanja, we saw there was a gain, negative, 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 there's going to be a loss, negative 32, negative, negative, definitely a loss. I'm glad this wasn't one that I had to say out loud. Okay, so we can talk about reasons for the change, but something that to notice, we can also mention why there could possibly be a gain because of the Ambanja coast. Suggest 3 reasons for change in the mangrove forest between 75 to 2000. Okay. And this actually is very well supported in your notes. This question is also from paper 11, 2022, May, June. So specific mention of a change, delta change in land use. That's not an answer. That is a guidance. You can't just say a change in land use. Like, what's the reason for the change in land use? Shrimp farming. And they're realizing now with the loss of land from erosion that shrimp farming wasn't ever going to net them more money than what they're losing due to coastal erosion, losing houses. Tourism, building resorts, housing, all within these same changing in land use. Infrastructure, so transportation ways, anything that's under the water, or anything that's under the ground, electrical wires, pipes, water pipes, sidewalks, roads, things like that. right, that'll be the first mark. We could talk about in terms of what the climate's doing. So temperature changes. Delta is a change in. I usually just use that as just a quick symbol for doing things like this. Please don't write that on your exam. Climate change. Global warming. You absolutely would not want to put for number 1, global warming, number 2, climate change. You're essentially saying the same thing. Climate change causes global warming. Increase in sea level, all of these are part of the same idea. More frequent. This is another different mark being underlined. More frequent, or an increase in the frequency or increase in the rate of storms. Could also say specific, like hurricanes, that definitely can damage our shorelines. My favorite, tsunamis. And if you're watching this, maybe you're not in America or in North America, typhoons are also an answer. Tropical cyclones, but we typically don't call them that here. We just call them hurricanes. All right. Another one, overharvesting. Timber. This also could be just chalked down to deforestation. My favorite cop-out answer is what I refer to it, because if you're talking about a decrease in population, sorry for them, an easy answer that we can write, and it goes a lot of the time for a decrease in population, disease. Disease is definitely more frequent too whenever you have an increase in temperature. They just spread more. Also within this mark, if you mentioned parasites, but honestly, I wouldn't think to write that because I really wouldn't always be associating plants with parasites, though I know they can get them. It just wouldn't have been my main go-to cause. And then if we are considering the increase in area, and that one's from the Ambanja, coast of Ambanja, a cause for that would be replanting of mangroves. Okay. So in this one, the questions that go with it are on this last exam question. This is also paper 11, May, June 2022. And this is like, I think the second question. This question was 14 marks total. Hooray. So that was about almost 20% of the exam. 20%. Cambridge loves mangroves, and it's also a repeated topic in A level. So looking at Madagascar, right away, something that I noticed, and just from doing these a lot, they're showing you a map, they show you the equator, and they're showing you the Tropic of Capricorn. I bet you're going to need to reference it, or you can reference it. Sometimes the question says, and without even looking at it, sometimes the question says, using figure 3.1, which is what you have here, though that it's not going to say that, but this is like the kinds of things they want you to reference. It's a good hint that if they're showing you a map, they want you to maybe reference the map. Anyway, the equator is 0 degrees. Tropic of Capricorn, the opposite of it is the Tropic of Cancer, and that is above the equator, and specifically it's 30 degrees north of the equator, though it's not put on there. just comparing it to us in the Northern Hemisphere, Tropic of Capricorn is 30 degrees south. And if we see sweet little Madagascar, she is right above it. So within this area. All right, so we're looking at the location of mangroves around the island of Madagascar. So you have the whole continent of Africa here, and then you have just Madagascar down here in the right. And then they're showing Madagascar. I'm on the last questions. And then even more zooming in. This top square is the Mahajamba Bay. I know on your paper you don't see this as clear as me, but if you want it printed out bigger, you do have, no, you don't. Maybe you do. I can't remember. I'm going to check when this is over. I was going to say if you have the blank copies. You got them in class, but if you want to see it bigger, you have it here, or you can also print it out yourself. Mahajamba Bay. Looking at the key, mangroves are the darker gray, and I know it's not as easy to see on your paper because I have the half copies too. And then land is just your light gray. Rivers are the darker squiggles. So all of this is mangrove, all the things that you see in the dark gray. Okay, all of this mangrove. And same down here. All mangrove, everything in the dark gray. Remember, you're allowed to use color on the exam on questions. So you could definitely do something like this if that was better for you. I always recommend it whenever there's maybe a graph with two different lines. You cannot use color on your own answers, your own graph, on biological drawings. You can use it to color code the question, though. You just can't use it for your answer. So take that as you like. Okay, and all the little areas within here. Okay, yeah, and so the dark gray is land. So this is going to be water. This part is water coming in. Just so you can visualize it. And then all of this is going to be land. Okay. There we go. And it's water coming in from the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean is all over here. Here, this side is the Atlantic. And you can see like the little indent here if I zoom in. Water. And then same right here. Water. So this is from the Indian Ocean. Definitely an estuarine area. And then rivers. These are your squiggle-like lines. You can see they're like the darker black lines on here. These black lines. So you have freshwater input, water coming in from the ocean, definitely an estuary. So you have brackish water, intercoastal areas. Here's the river. Okay. And all of that just for this question. Outline the conditions in Mahajamba Bay that make it suitable for the development of a mangrove forest. So this is going to be like the first two boxes you guys filled in your note page. That was in the video I posted earlier. Here's the Mahajamba Bay. And so like I just covered, it is influenced by ocean, so salt water. It has freshwater input from rivers. Definitely we need to mention that it is in a subtropical or tropical climate. I'm sure the water will be shallow. It's very close to land. And if it's an estuary type area, that also needs to happen. Estuaries are intertidal. We can also talk about it being intertidal. The definition of an estuary is a partially enclosed tidal body of water. Within those conditions, we also need to make sure that the water is relatively calm. It typically is in an estuary, so you can have sedimentation of silts. If you look at your influence to land, this all the brown areas, surely you're going to have some sediment runoff or runoff that contains dissolved sediments in there, dissolved nutrients that can help with the growth, protein production, DNA production. What else? Enzymes. Anyway, making chlorophyll. Okay, so just outline the conditions, and it's 3 marks. We need at least 3 things. So they're in a tropical, or they need subtropical climates. You could also be specific, and I shouldn't put a parentheses, 25 degrees north to 25 degrees south. It's an intertidal area. So influenced by the tides with saline water. From the Indian Ocean. And fresh water. Input. Okay. Something along the lines of there's slow moving water or low wave action, calm water, all that jazz. Being shallow. So something along those lines so that we can mention this will allow for sedimentation, so the process of sediments being deposited, of fine sediments or fine grains, not gains, grains. And then one more. Sediment runoff. From land. Or maybe you could mention like runoff containing nutrients from land that will also help their growth. Some mangrove species in Madagascar use the same method of reproduction as the red mangrove tree, and that is what is featured in your syllabus. It's also what is in the notes that you have. So some mangrove species in Madagascar use the same method of reproduction as the red mangrove tree. There's a lot of species of mangroves. Florida typically only has, I think, just 3. Red mangrove, black mangrove, and a white mangrove. Explain, so why and how, this method of reproduction. So explain why, and how it is an advantage to these mangrove trees. So explain the method of the reproduction method, which is viviparous. And then how is this an advantage to the mangrove tree? How does that method help them? And we only got one more question after this. Okay, so we should definitely reference the method. Mangroves are viviparous. That VIVI, the vivi, is referring to it living on the parent for a little bit. Like I mentioned, it doesn't just drop the seed. The seed is going to grow into a propagule while still being attached, and we can write about that. The seeds remain attached to the parent. And something you guys might be noticing is that there's some more detail in these exam answers than they have in the textbook, which sometimes is frustrating. Like, how could you expect somebody to be able to produce this on an exam answer if it wasn't an expectation in the main source of content? But this is why doing these are definitely an advantage. And so, like, explain, like, why would they say on their parent plant? So the seeds could not survive in a saline environment. The propagules can, but the seeds can't. And so they, meaning the seeds, gain water and nutrients from the parent. Something I wouldn't have thought to write, but again, just repeat, this is why we do exam questions. So while they're attached to the parent, germination occurs. So it's like when it actually emerges from its seed to start to germinate and start to grow. And while it's still attached to the parent, it's already mentioned, so you don't need to really mention again, while it's still attached. And this will form a propagule. And it's not until it's a propagule that it gets dropped. The propagule will drop into the ocean water or drops into the ocean or floats in ocean. And at this point, it can survive. This is that elongated structure with the smaller little prop roots going. And they'll have like their leaves starting to grow at the top. They really won't start growing their leaves until they can embed themselves in some sediment when they find a very soft, sandy substrate. Sometimes you see them hanging off mangroves and they have some of those root structures already growing, the little propagules. Anyway, I guess even with just some more detail, like, oh, how? By ocean currents, and not even just the ocean, but water currents in general, because you can also have currents from wind and from tidal influence in, like, the lagoon. We live by the Indian River Lagoon. Almost done. Propagule settles and grows in a new area because it's away from the parent plant, and that's the last thing that we can mention. Last mark. The seeds or the propagules move away, or that kind of statement, to not, and by move you could also say float, compete with the parent plant. And so it's effective that they move so far away, and they can, float on average for 40 days, but they can float all the way up to a whole year. And then finally, when they find some soft sediment, like a soft sandy substrate or muddy substrate, they will embed themselves in it. They'll just land in it. They'll settle in it and then start to grow the roots. Last one. This one is interesting. I had to look at it a handful of times just to make sure that I could answer it correctly and just make sense of it. Okay. One of the other things mentioned in the notes is that coral reefs and mangroves go really well together. Not just that, but mangroves will also assist in stopping the deposition or the sedimentation of fine sediments on coral reefs by slowing down the water first and trapping sediments. You don't want it to land in a coral polyp and then have it block the coral polyp from being able to feed, also from blocking sunlight penetration to the zooxanthellae that lives in the coral tissues. Likewise, sediment can land on the seagrass beds and kind of start to bury the seagrasses. Coral reefs and seagrass beds are both present off the west coast of Madagascar. And that was on the map here. And this is the west coast. Suggest one ecological impact of the loss of a mangrove forest in the Bombicota Bay. One ecological impact, so something that's happening to the ecosystem. And so that will give you the 1 mark. The impact this would have on the local human community. So it can't be separate, they need to be linked together. So the ecological impact caused because of the mangrove loss, and the impact that whatever you just stated as the ecological one, this meaning the ecological impact, how that would affect a human community. That's our last question. All right, we can start with the obvious, because they did mention coral reefs and seagrass beds. So this is going to be referencing these marks I'm going to give here is loss, mangrove, impact on ecosystem. And there will be a few of them. Buildup of sediments on a coral reef. Or the seagrass bed itself. Referencing damage or loss to the nursery area. Remember, mangroves are nursery areas for fish or marine species. This is where juveniles hang out until they're adults, and then they can go to the ocean. Within this same mark, I'm going to squeeze it in. We're talking about nursery area loss or damage. This can also talk about habitat loss for marine species or fish, because then that's going to be an easy link to humans, because that's a food source for us, and it's also something that we can make money off of. Okay, you can also talk about biodiversity loss. And so biodiversity, remember, it has 3 different components to it. The genetic diversity, the species diversity, and the ecosystem diversity. So you're going to lose the different ecosystems, you're going to lose the different species there. And because different species aren't going to be living there, and you're not going to have so many niches for them to be able to accommodate and take advantage of. You're going to then lose the overall variations in your gene pool. And the last one, water quality loss. Remember, mangroves filter out like impurities in the water. So this would be the impact on ecosystems if you had loss of a mangrove forest. And so you would just need one of these and how one of these things will affect the human. I'll do the human one in purple. So this is going to be the human impact. I don't like the way that sounds. Impact on human community is better. Human impact because it seems like humans did this. Although humans probably did. They're probably the cause of the loss of the mangrove forest. Impact on human community. Okay. So you could say this could cause a decrease in fish population. That would be pretty direct with the damage, loss to nursery area for fish or marine species or habitat loss. Additionally, that goes with biodiversity loss, could also go with water quality loss. And you only need one. You actually can only put one of the ecosystem impact and then one of how that's going to affect human communities. Decrease money or income from fishing. Decrease fish catches or fish harvests because there's not as much there. Again, that's a food source for us. So it's impact on humans. I think if you were going to say decrease in a food source, I would just maybe reference to like decrease on fish as a food source or lack of that. And decrease in tourism because nobody wants to go to a place that's not going to be as biodiverse and doesn't have the same amount and variety of organisms there. There's one more. Just one more different idea for this. I'll do this one in, gosh, I don't know. Red. Okay. One more. It could be that on the ecosystem, you're going to have a decreased protection of the shoreline. The shoreline isn't just necessarily for humans, right? We have sand dunes there. We have nesting turtles, sea turtles. We have marine birds. So this is another option if you're going this route. The one I just put, like what we wrote in purple, is very specific to everything that was in blue. For this one, the ecosystem or ecological impact on the ecosystem could be decreased protection of shorelines, and for the human community, impact on human community, this is going to be terrible for us. This is going to increase coastal erosions, could increase flooding. Ooh, all right, so there you go. Those are the mangrove questions, and you're so close to your exam. Good job for going this whole way. Despite me chatting it up and all that, it's really, really, really great review for you guys to see and talk out and try and make sense of the mark scheme. And you also got to add a couple extra details that you could put on your note sheet, mainly that mangroves have very tough, thick, and leathery leaves. Enjoy your long weekend, and thanks for doing this, and you're going to do great in what, 17 days? If you're watching this tomorrow, Saturday, it's tomorrow, Friday. 16 days. Yikes. Okay, guys, have a good night.